Hey, Sam from Barrie Community Media here. As I'm sure you've heard by now, teachers and students in our area are heading back to school on Monday. But Stephen Lecce isn't the one coming back into classrooms. Teachers like Katie Sweet are. I caught up with Katie, who is a teacher at Bear Creek Secondary School, and we chatted about her thoughts on going back into the classroom, as well as what she's learned teaching online throughout this crazy year that we've had.
And this may be an unfair question because you just got the news, but how are you feeling now that you know you're heading back on Monday?
In some ways relieved because the class I'm teaching next semester is way easier to teach in person, but in some ways a bit tentative because we have 3 cases at our school. So
Okay. And as you prepare to head back in on Monday, kind of what's going through your mind now? What do you have to get ready for the next week?
change over all my stuff that was preparing. Uh, yeah, that's a lot, but we'll get there.
And does it involve do you have to move a lot of stuff back into the school? Like do you kind of have your own kind of work set up at home now that's the same stuff, or how does that work?
I have to bring some stuff back. I normally work at a computer lab, and my previous class was not in that lab, so I haven't seen that room in uh, quite a while. So I have no idea what state it's in right now. So I guess I'll find out on Monday.
Oh, okay. And as far as you go, and we were in lockdown in the spring, we went back into lockdown after Christmas. How did you find this lockdown, teaching during this lockdown? How did that feel compared to teaching in the spring?
A little better in the sense that it wasn't a complete black hole. We had some stuff in place, but still, like all the issues with it still continue, and it still feels like we're reacting instead of planning. Like that really hasn't changed.
And how does that affect the students, do you think, this kind of in-person, virtual, in-person, switching back and forth?
I think the jumping back and forth is very confusing for them. They're good about it. They're especially like at high school, like they're rolling with the punches as best they can. But it does have an impact. I definitely saw an impact with my class that I just finished, like before we went to online and after. There was a huge difference. It definitely affected their marks. So there is an impact.
What was that difference, like between in person and online? You kind of mentioned the students kind of seem different. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, basically, how do I sum this up? A lot of kids, like I was teaching a 4C English, so it was like a college level class, and I find those kids especially, all of them told me when we first started, like they didn't want to be remote. They chose specifically not to be because they knew they didn't work that well online and had trouble like organizing themselves, and that's definitely those kids, that's probably what they struggle with the most. Like when they're in class, when they're kind of there and they have the focus, they're quite good, but in that kind of amorphous environment of having to organize themselves at home when their parents are at work, a lot of them really struggle with that. So it was a little better this time around because it's synchronous. So we are like meeting every day online, and that helps somewhat, but that's assuming they join the class, assuming they show up, assuming they hand in their work. So I have to spend a lot of time hunting them down and reminding them of things and essentially doing their organization for them. And that is not as big of a problem in class than it is online.
Oh, okay. So it seems like that almost became a new part of your job as sort of like the
Oh
online
yeah.
administrator.
Yeah, for sure. Everything takes longer in virtual. That's kind of what we have found. Um, and it's definitely like I hear my colleagues say this a lot, and I didn't realize it until we had to do a lot of this remote teaching, like how much I rely on like nonverbal cues amongst my students to like manage do my lessons, but also just that kind of like tracking every day is so much easier in person, where you can just ask them, do you have this? How are you doing on it? Show me your work. And trying to manage that remotely is just so much more problematic and takes so much more time. And you'll email someone and they won't get back to you for 5 days. It's that kind of thing. It's a lot more frustrating.
Do you think you're going to see the change in how kids are learning when you go back into the classroom? Like, do you think this kind of period of online learning throughout this past year will kind of like impact how kids learn going forward in your classes?
I think so. I don't think we have seen like any like what might come from the long-term effects yet. But definitely just confusion and organization for sure. And having to catch up of stuff that even from last year's lockdown, right? That they don't know. I know the class that I have starting 8 a.m. tomorrow is a grade 10 class, meaning normally that's a fairly like they know a few things going into it, so they've probably taken that class before, but I can't assume any of that now because last year was, who knows what they had. They possibly didn't have any, like, a lot of our foundational components, so I really have to kind of make sure I'm teaching from the ground up there.
And it seems like from what I'm hearing that you have a lot of kind of new responsibilities or different kind of work patterns. How has that been on you? Like, how has this new kind of style of teaching affected you?
We're dealing with it. It's interesting. In some ways, we like that's things we've been struggling with even in person, like things that get downloaded onto us. But definitely just in terms of like the time it takes. That's been interesting to juggle because when we're remote, it never really feels like the day ends. It's, students will email you at 10 at night, 12 at night, and you feel bad if you don't get back to them. And it's just kind of a very different process and trying to find like, when am I marking? When am I planning? How can I learn these tools? We never seem to have time for any of that. So we're always playing catch up. Oh, I couldn't hear that last thing you said.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. If you could kind of choose one thing that would make your job easier right now, what would be the number one thing that you need in terms of teaching or communicating with students?
Uh, so the tricky, I mean, there's no easy solutions. That's the hard part. There's no magic button that will suddenly make my job easier. Um, it would be great if we had. The one thing I did have this past semester was I had some smaller classes, and that was like a giant boon. It was very helpful. I do not have that in my coming classes that I'm just starting. So in some ways, I'm glad we'll be back because the large classes are just way easier to manage in person. Even though there's other things around that with safety and everything, but the small classes online are way better. And partially because I'm always having to chase them and track them and remind them of things, and so it's just way easier to manage. So that is always a component. Aside from that, just it's surprising all the little tech tools that would help us that we don't have, and having to like suss those out and find them and hear, what colleagues have found when we never have training on any of this is always a frustration. And just figuring that stuff out. Like so many of we had licenses that expired this year. The program that I used to teach, because I'm a digital arts teacher, we use Adobe programs, which the kids don't have at home, and they're super expensive. So trying to figure out like alternatives to that all falls on me, right? Like no one else is solving those problems. So I have to solve all those problems somehow.
And
and we're doing it, but it's just it's a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Along the way, have you learned any like tips or tricks or found any lifesaver apps that have really helped?
I think I've had, oh yes, I have a storage of them, but which I, email with my colleagues because we have to help each other, right? It's that's the only way we get through. So yeah, I fully appreciate any like companies that are giving us like free online tools, like free apps, because we're now running entire classes based on them because we don't have any other choice. So those kinds of things were super helpful. I did find that the first lockdown, like a lot of places were really eager to like help us, and now not so much. So the ones that have kind of stuck along and done such things, yeah, it was good. Yeah.
What kind of communication has there been about new protocols or kind of new measures kind of coming into this new season?
We might get goggles. That's it.
Okay. Oh, okay. And so how are you feeling going into this week?
That's definitely the scariest part. Mostly because I do feel that, okay, we're on the right track. Ontario's numbers are coming down. I feel like we're getting there, but yeah, the fact that there are still cases in my school recently, as of this week, that's still kind of a scary prospect. And I think Simcoe particularly, because we know we have the variants in the community, that's still a little scary. So I mean, we'll deal with it. Um, it's not like we weren't dealing with that since September, but it is always a concern. I definitely felt before the break that everyone was getting very anxious as the numbers were climbing and climbing. So hopefully we'll return on a better note, but that could all change very quickly. So we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for your time and kind of explaining how your past months have been, and best of luck to you and your students
Thank
going
you.
into this next week.